Welcome to your mindfulness and meditation presentation. I am going to be starting with mindfulness, and that will be the length of the first video, and then the second video will go over meditation. So before we dive in, I want this to be both a introspective experience where you think about your own experience and how this can apply to your own life, and then we'll apply it to the role of being a coach as well. So to dive in, I would like to start with some definitions of mindfulness. So to do that, I would like to bring up this concept of reality versus perspective, and the fact that a lot of times reality and our own perspective don't necessarily match, but the truth of that is that it doesn't really matter in most cases that it doesn't match. It just matters that we're aware of our own perspective. So a lot of times we will be really busy, have a lot going on, but we still feel this peace, tranquility, and maybe even some calm in engaging in those experiences, where other times those experiences may make us feel like the head to the right, where we have nothing but confusion and stress filling our mind, and we in that case don't have time or space to be able to think about other things. And in those moments, that's when we lose balance. So this is thinking about your perspective, the perspective of individuals you coach, and maybe how they feel about their current state and how they perceive their current state. So what is mindfulness? I'm sure all of us have had some encounter with mindfulness. It's pretty present in our current day. The Time magazine article on the mindful revolution discusses this new science of having health and happiness and how to tune into your body and find a way to kind of be an engaged part of that process rather than passively going through life and letting things occur to us. This mindfulness encourages us to be actually actively and intentionally engaged in the process. So a couple of quotes to help us come to some understanding of mindfulness. First, I start with Winnie the Pooh. He asks, "What day is it?" And Piglet answers back, "It's today." And Pooh's response is, "My favorite day." Perfect. Today is my favorite day. And I think that just shows a really good perspective on how we approach our day. The day is what it is. And so to be able to actually embrace that and say, okay, how am I going to move forward and make this a successful day? That's what mindfulness can do for us. A second image just looks at the idea that even though our body is physically present, a lot of times we are either thinking of the future or the past. And even though I think that there is value in both planning for the future and using the past as a guide for ourselves, we need to be present when we're trying to actively be engaged. And so I think even just saying, okay, I'm going to think about the future now, that's still being present in a sense because we're being intentional about where we're letting our mind go. And that is mindfulness from my perspective as well. So Thich Nhat Hanh is one of the gurus, you could call him, of mindfulness. He wrote the book, The Miracle of Mindfulness. And in this book, he has a definition of what mindfulness is that I think is really powerful. It says, in mindfulness, one is not only restful and happy, but alert and awake. It is not evasion. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. It is a serene encounter with reality. So we're actually facing reality and being aware of what is happening rather than trying to let our mind wander away from those thoughts. Burfwa is a really useful tool to help make this mindfulness practice happen. These are just 5 different steps that you can take when you're trying to be mindful to kind of cue yourself into those mindful aspects of your day. So first, take a breath. Find a way to relax, even if it's just counting to 10. Start to feel what's around you. Feel your emotions. Watch others and start paying attention to how relationships and how connections are happening. And then most importantly, to just allow the present moment to be what it is. and trying not to place any judgment on it, but just letting it be the present moment and recognizing it, paying attention to it, and then moving from that point. So if you ever feel stuck, or even if you're trying to help someone to just be more mindful, even just having a cue of birthwa is going to be something that will really help cue that for you. So it's important to have some mindful qualities to be able to make mindfulness actually happen and to have it be an active experience. These are just some that come to mind that we want to try to have when we're trying to be mindful. And this is something you would want for yourself as well as trying to encourage it in those that you coach. So first, just have a beginner's mind. And I think this is a really strong thought in the fact that if we just approach something even just like a child would, where we just kind of go for it, embrace it, and not place as much judgment behind it, I think that that can really open our mind to what our mind is able to do, rather than having some preconceived idea or using our past experiences to dictate how the process goes. Second is being non-judgmental. This is key to mindfulness because it's not deciding whether something is good or bad, it's just recognizing it as fact and then moving from that moment. And I think that kind of helps let us use emotions and let us use experiences to our benefit rather than letting them control us. Acceptance, again, ties into non-judgment. You see that it's there, you let it go, and just accept that it happened. Non-attachment, non-striving, not necessarily trying to be stuck to one idea, but being open-minded, being willing to let the future go a way that it goes. And obviously we want to be intentional in the way that we live, but by being present, we're being actively engaged in what we're doing and then letting the process flow from there. So a couple of strategies. First, we'll look at mindful eating, then we'll look at being mindful while we're being physically active. And mindful eating is a very powerful tool that you can help people use. Often when we get stuck on the idea of calories or weight loss, we lose some of the value in actually having a relationship with food. When I do presentations, I like to remind people that we have taste buds for a reason. We actually receive a physiological response to food. And I think that's a pretty powerful thing to recognize, especially because it's wonderful. We can absolutely love food and we can have a almost spiritual experience. I'm sure some of you can relate to eating something where you felt just completely in that moment. You couldn't believe how good it was. And there's something to say for taking time to find those moments in our lives. So first, just paying attention to some of these words. I want you to think of what word stands out to you when you look at this word bubble. So being mindful, being intuitive, letting indulgence happen from time to time, satisfaction, texture, connection, savor. A lot of times when we think of the word diet, we don't think of the word savor because people are worried about it having the least amount of calories possible. But really, if you savor your food, you may not need as much to satisfy whatever urge or impulse is guiding that decision to eat. A lot of us are familiar, I'm sure, with the new My Plate. It's replaced the food pyramid as a guide to help us eat properly, or at least make choices about what our plate looks like during a meal. And they've created a mindful eating image that helps us to see that from a mindfulness standpoint. So one section is observe, paying attention again to those physiological responses, paying attention to how you're feeling. Are you full? Does your stomach feel empty? Are you stressed? Are you feeling satisfied? And this can often stop us from overeating or overindulging because we're paying attention to that point where we've really hit where our body needed us to go. Savor, again, that word we saw in that text bubble. What is the texture? What does it smell like? Does it have a taste? Is it crunchy, spicy? And do we like that or not, right? And again, not necessarily putting judgment behind it, but just saying, is this something I'm enjoying? Being in the moment. I'm sure all of us have had a meal while we're driving or had a meal at our office, and this is something that can be very distracting and can take away from the experience. And the goal with this is to just eat, as you can see. And then finally, non-judgment. This ties into everything that mindfulness does. With this plate that we have, just being mindful, compassionate. A lot of times when we speak about food or how we eat, we use a lot of words like should and guilt. I try to stay away from using words like good and bad when it comes to food, because a lot of times we can get caught up in saying, oh, broccoli is good and something German chocolate cake is bad, right? But really, we don't need to put a label like that behind it. I like to use words like more nutritionally dense or has more nutritional value, because we can still have cake when we want it, but we just need to recognize that there are benefits to having things that have nutritional value as well, and we need to be aware of what we're eating. And that just leads to that last little where your milk or dairy cup would be, is just being aware and just being able to actually taste food rather than just eating a whole bag of potato chips and not noticing, for example, which who's done that, right? So next we're going to just look at some kind of tips to pay attention to being mindful. As you can see, 73% of people in 2000 suffer from digestive difficulties, and they spend a very small amount of time eating in a day. And I think we can take a cue from our friends to the east in Europe, where meals are really a time to have conversation and be social and still spend time at a meal and make it an actual experience. So sitting down, turning off any devices, actually having a meal time where you sit down and enjoy a meal rather than just being on the go, paying attention to your senses, and then also just making sure you have healthy chewing habits, that you take your time to chew. So now for mindful exercise, I really just want to think about how, when you're talking to people about movement, how you can introduce being mindful. Things like yoga, Tai Chi, I think being mindful really comes into play more naturally during those experiences, because we are engaged in a body awareness activity where the placement of our hand actually means something and the placement of our foot actually means something. There are activities that you can do where you do mindful walking, where you walk at a very slow pace and just pay attention to what's around you. Notice the flowers, notice how your feet feel on the ground, paying attention to your body posture and that sort of thing. There's actually a lot of research that goes into the idea of just being aware of our body and using our body as a tool for communication can make us more powerful individuals when it comes to negotiating or having communication or conversations with others. Gardening can be a mindful exercise activity. Remember, exercise or movement doesn't just have to be in a gym or in a space that's kind of familiar to exercise, but really just finding ways to move. And I think that this is a powerful thing to help people pay attention to what they're enjoying, maybe avoiding injury, that sort of thing. And I think mindful exercise can even help people that think they hate exercise to maybe find ways to enjoy it, because it even could be, okay, we're mindful during the exercise, but let's be mindful after. Do you have more energy? Do you feel happier overall? Those sorts of things can be pretty powerful motivators as well. So I want to finish our mindfulness conversation by encouraging you to go look at a TED Talk. The author of the TED Talk is Andy Puddicombe. As you can see here, he is a Buddhist monk that is going to encourage mindfulness and being active in your day. So I encourage you to go to this TED Talk. It is about 10 minutes long. You can find it. It's London, England, 2012, and his name again is Andy Puddicombe. So I encourage you to go watch that and then join back for the meditation conversation.